Middleton. Giannis trailing the lob. Oh! Run, 2-on-1. Green to finish. Wow, the alley-oop. LeBron turned the corner. Inside! He made Yusuf Nurkic's screensaver. Here comes Murray. Alley-oop to Gordon. Oh, what a play!
All right, joined now by Brad Rowland. He's the host of Locked On Hawks. Thank you so much for hopping on, man. Let's talk Atlanta. Let's talk Hawks. We had some expectations for this team in the offseason to kind of improve upon the 500 or so record that they've been around. And now we're sitting here at 9-10. Things have not been going as well of late. Started the year, there was a 4-game win streak in there. Things felt pretty good at the beginning of the year, but they're 5-8 in their last 13 games. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunately, if you're a Hawks fan, familiar in a lot of ways. It feels like it's kind of felt the last couple of years, and I think it's too early to panic for one thing. But it's the defensive end of the floor, which is not a secret. There are a few teams in the league like this right now where they're kind of just all offense, no defense teams, and the Hawks have been on the kind of the wrong side of that right now, where they've lost some close games. Their underlying metrics are better than the record, I think, at this moment in time. But at the same time, I think everyone, including the people inside the building over there, would agree they can't be this bad defensively and reach their goals, basically, is what it comes down to. Offensively, they've been good and totally fine and all that. But the other end of the floor is the usual problem, and it's not going very well.
9-10 record, third in offensive rating on cleaning the glass, 25th in defensive rating. 14th in net rating, yields kind of about average, and it's about where you would expect for a team that's kind of hovered around 500 here. The thing that I was so interested when we spoke in the offseason, just like right before the year, the Trey DeJounte pairing, because that's where you want your best players to shine. You want your best players to shine together. Just looked it up again right before we started. Minus 23 in 410 minutes. That's just not good enough, and it's never going to be good enough for the Hawks if they want those two guys to be the focal points. Are these the same issues as they've faced in previous years, or are they different issues?
I would say similar issues. They've still been above average on offense with those guys playing, and that's what you would expect in some ways. But they haven't fixed the defense. I'm not putting it all on Murray by any means, but one of the theories of the Murray edition was that he was going to help fix their defense, and that has not happened to this point. So that's really the area where you're playing with the starters most of the time when they're playing together, because they stagger these guys the entire game. One of them's always on the court all the time, so they don't play that many minutes together. It's about 20-ish per game, like you just laid out, and that's a lot of minutes, but it's not it's less than half the game, and they do need to kind of fine-tune that pairing. And I think with Quinn Snyder at the helm, they've played off each other more and more effectively, I would say, offensively. It's a little bit less your turn, my turn, which I think is a good thing. But the fundamental issues are still the same. I do think, though, the way that they interact and the way they play together is pretty far down the list of things I'm actually worried about on this team right now. But at the same time, to the point of the question, they kind of have to be awesome when they play together, and they haven't been. So it's like which do you choose to focus on? Should they be better with those two guys on the court? I would say yes, but also as far as why they're not winning more games right now, I don't know how high that is on the list of problems.
No, and that's completely fair. And when you do such a stark stagger as what the Hawks do, you want to make sure that those individual lineups where only one of those guys are on the floor is always good too. So if we just laid it out, like you said, 20 minutes per game where they're playing together means there's 28 minutes per game where they're not. So I can understand that. What combinations have you liked in those other minutes then?
Yeah, I mean, the trick right now with the Hawks is that, it's interesting because I feel like, I'm sure you hear this from people that cover teams, teams that are young players get a lot of attention positively and negatively, right? And I think probably the number one positive story of this team in the early going was the development of Jalen Johnson, who was kind of having a breakout season, right? And I was excited about that. I think it's still very appealing, but right now he's hurt. And without him, it's a little bit of small sample size theater, but they've not been the same team without Jalen Johnson on defense in particular. So that's one of the questions. But I do think that if you look at the numbers with Trey and Jalen, or there's some combinations that have worked pretty well. I think Jalen Johnson, not to put too much on him, I'm mindful of not doing that, and but I think that he unlocks a lot of things for them on both ends of the floor. Like, he's the one guy on their forward line that's a really good passer, for instance, on offense, and then defensively, he's their best rebounding forward by a huge margin. Their best transition player. He has flaws too, but it's crazy how much they've seemed to miss him for a guy that, while I was high on him, was not like widely nationally projected to be a top 3 or 4 player on this team. He's been the 3rd best player this year pretty easily. So it's like it's a pretty interesting combination of things to talk about when he's going to be out for a couple more weeks, and they're kind of playing triage about him.
It's funny, when I was looking at his numbers and I was looking at kind of the profile of a guy like that, he's in his age 22 season, kind of reminds me of Michael Porter Jr. in Denver. They're obviously distinctly different players, but young guys that putting up these massively efficient numbers, these massively efficient stats at that forward spot, and kind of were initially seen as superfluous or as a role player, but then kind of grow into that particular role. I think he's been great. Like, he's been awesome, and it's been one of those fun storylines to see. Just looking at the numbers here, 14 points, 7 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 1 block. That's great. That's an awesome number that you get to look forward to. And when we projected their starting lineup at the beginning of the year, we didn't have him in there. Like, I think it was Saddiq Bey who we thought was going to be in that spot. Just how has the forward pairings kind of played out, whether it's with Jalen Johnson and Saddiq Bey, just kind of now that John Collins is not there, he was a mainstay for so long.
Yeah, it's interesting because it actually was Saddiq Bey to open the season. They opened the season with Saddiq as the starter, which I kind of thought was going to happen, and it did. But Jalen kind of just forced his way on the court. I mean, he was notably good right out of the gate, and the pairings kind of worked better with him on the court. Bay's defense has been a problem area. He's not alone by any means, but they're having some trouble when they're playing, especially without Jalen Johnson, and having Bay at the 4 alongside their backcourt problems defensively, not only just Trey and DeJounte, but Bogdanovich, and they have a lot of poor defenders on the perimeter. DeAndre Hunter has been kind of the fixture. He's kind of been DeAndre Hunter, which is not the worst thing in the world by any means. He's a starting quality forward in the league, but he's not a guy that's going to be, he's not a top 50 player. You know what I mean? He's not breaking out. This is year 5. He kind of is what he is at this stage, which is fine, but he's not a difference maker. So without Johnson in particular, they don't have a lot of juice on the forward line. It's very apparent to me on offense and defense, especially defense. And while they have quality center play, they just need generally more from the forwards. I think I've been saying this on all of my podcast appearances and other things like last 2 months. The forward line was going to dictate this season for the Hawks. And I think one of the reasons why they are where they are right now as a 500-ish team is that the forward line has kind of been, outside of Johnson's breakout, and of course he's hurt right now, has been pretty underwhelming. Hunter's just been kind of the same guy. Bay's kind of struggled, and AJ Griffin's barely playing in his second season. Like, they don't have a lot going on at those spots.
Let's push on that a little bit, because AJ Griffin was one of those guys that, especially watching him last year, he looked so comfortable. He looked so capable in those minutes, and like a guy who was a scorer wise above his years in a lot of ways. What's going on? Like, I'm seeing 11 games, no starts, 9 minutes per game.
Yeah, it's the no starts is not a surprise. Other than Johnson, they've been pretty healthy,
Sure.
But it's a combination of, he was kind of the 9th guy coming into the season, and Snyder likes to play short rotations. He's been playing 8-man rotations for full halves, like on a regular basis this season. I don't know if that's going to always happen, but he was kind of coming into the year kind of on the fringe. And then when they now have Wes Matthews, they've kind of gone the veteran route there, a more boring defense first veteran. I think in part to kind of triage the defense, because they've had so many issues there. And AJ Griffin is struggling defensively, as a lot of guys do. But second year guy, and he's again not alone by any means, but he's not going to help you there right now. And he's not playing with a ton of confidence, I don't think. It's too early of a sample size. He's not played that much for me to like be worried about him necessarily, but he feels like he's kind of sped up. He might be the only guy, maybe Clint Capella be the other one on this roster that might have been a little bit cleaner fit under the previous regime, that played a little bit slower. AJ's a pretty methodical guy. He's kind of, and for me, it's a positive thing. He's pretty even keel. He doesn't really get too high, too low. He's kind of playing at his own speed. But right now, the Hawks are trying to play fast, and they're trying to move quickly and make quick decisions. That's not really what he does. So it's a combination of, they have some decent depth. they also are not prioritizing just like playing him just to play him. Like I think they're trying to win games right now. And also he's just not playing that well when he plays. It's small stints, like 3-4 minutes, but if he doesn't make shots, he's not really giving you a lot. So that's kind of the longish version, but it's I wish he was playing more often. If it was me in charge, I would, given this team not going to be a contender this year anyway, I would prioritize to just kind of get him out there more consistently. That'd be what I would be trying to do. But I do understand not, because he's not played that well, and their biggest problem is defense, and he just can't help there.
Yeah, it's just hard for me to really put that on him as a young player. You're not really expecting that from him. You should expect that from your veterans. You should expect that from your starters. And the fact that they haven't been able to defend even without him, that's not exactly a great sign either. So that's something to watch. That's something that I will be checking in with you in a couple weeks or 6 weeks later now. Is there any reason to believe right now that the Hawks are going to be more than an average? What are the threads that we can kind of pull on that say, hey, they're underperforming in this thing that will definitely benefit them later?
Yeah, I think in general they're underperforming their point differential. You mentioned cleaning the glass earlier. Some of the more advanced numbers, the adjusted net ratings, like they're still kind of in the positive, but it's more like the +1. You know what I mean? Maybe they should be 10-9 instead of 9-10 kind of thing. Yeah. It's not like they've like wildly underperformed. Maybe a game or two. I do think the defense is going to be, this is risky to say, better than it's been so far. Now, are they going to be good defensively? Almost definitively not. Like they don't have great personnel. I've ranted on this for many, many months and months and months other places. If you go up and down the line on this roster right now, outside of the center position, they don't have really many guys that I would describe as even average defensive players. And that will catch up to you. Like when you're kind of, Jalen Johnson is the outlier in terms of like size and burst. But so if he's not there, it's even more magnified. But put him to the side, and you have all these guys who are either small or just slow-footed or whatever, and it's like, So I do think that the offense is legitimate, and that's legitimately a top 5-ish unit in the league, and that's a great baseline to have. If you can keep that offense at the top 5 level and just be 20th on defense instead of 25th or 26th, that's the path, I think. Like opponent shooting-wise, they've been pretty. I don't want to call it unlucky, but I think they're 28th in opponent shooting right now.
Right.
I don't know if that's going to continue to be that bad. If it does, then that's doomsday. You just can't live with that number given the way that they're playing. They're playing a different scheme, which we'll save for another time. It's a much more aggressive. They're playing at the level more with their bigs, etc. I think they might at some point kind of go back to what they used to do, play a little bit more conservatively. That's maybe one pathway. I'm not saying that's not going to fix it, but if you're trying to triage, that might be a way to kind of minimize some of the mistakes they're making, etc. So I think that's the long version of. I think the offense is legitimate, which is a nice building block, top 5 unit, and then there's just like maybe incremental gains to be had on defense, which might push you to in the mid 40s in wins. It's not going to get you to 50 wins. It's just with what I've seen so far, barring a Jalen Johnson continued breakout as he comes back, there's not that other than trades, there's not really that thing to make them hugely better. It's just that you have to defend incrementally better and sort of nudge your way back into respectability there.
Yeah, when you say more aggressive defensive scheme, it doesn't really line up with me for Clint Capella. I can understand it with Okongwu. Like he's a guy that makes a lot of sense. He's 6'8", I think, and a little bit shorter, but definitely somebody who switches out onto the perimeter, I think, a little bit more adequately, especially with Capella kind of aging out a little bit in terms of his physical prime. So that's interesting. That might be kind of a sign of things to come, maybe in the next 6 weeks or so. Very fascinating. Yeah. All right, let's wrap up with this. At what point do the Hawks start targeting upgrades? We've heard their interest kind of through the grapevine of Pascal Siakam before, but is he a guy that they're looking at, or is this something where they just have to wait how these next kind of 6 weeks look?
I think it's a little bit of both. They're definitely in on Siakam. They have been for a long time. I know it kind of got rekindled, but it kind of never went away. What I would tell you is like, unless it's a hardened situation where there's an active trade request, guys don't really get traded in October and November.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like once camp starts, it kind of just quiets. But I think that the Hawks were always in on Siakam this summer. They just kind of didn't meet. They did not want to meet the price that Toronto was asking, because they were asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars. And I understand why they didn't meet that price. If that price gets lowered, I could certainly see the Hawks staying in and maybe being the team that gets Pascal in the next few months. But even then, that's probably more of a late January, February kind of deal. Like most of the time, you don't see a ton of action in December. Occasionally you will, but I think the ultimate answer to your question about like when we see or how aggressive they are in trades is like, where are they in the standings? It's a lot easier to sell a buy move, an aggressive adding to your team move if you are the 6 seed versus if you're the 10 seed. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And that may not be a huge difference, but do they want to keep throwing the way this is going to sound more negative than I mean it, but do you want to keep throwing good money after bad? You know what I mean? They've kind of already pushed not all in, but they're in. They're trying to win now. They went and paid a lot for DeJounte and trade capital. They traded 5 picks for Sadiq Bey. Like they're trying to win actively right now. Do they want to leverage more future capital to improve? Because they don't really. I mean, maybe AJ Griffin will be the only guy on the roster. Maybe Kobe Buffkin, who's also been bagged up right now, their first round pick. They have a couple of guys on their team that are like kind of the equivalent of draft pick inclusions, like sweeteners. But usually it's draft picks and young guys. And do they want to keep going down that road for a team that, maybe if it's a Siakam level player, that's a big enough upgrade where it's like maybe you can justify it. But do you want to trade a first round pick for a role player? Maybe not on this team with where you are, that kind of thing,
No, of course. And it's all about kind of where you are in your journey. And if you can see the light at the end of the tunnel for a championship or high level playoffs, then obviously you want to get aggressive in those situations and really capitalize on that moment. But until we see them kind of break this mold of looking like a 500 team for the most part, then I can understand being a little bit hesitant as well. So we will see what happens. He is Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. Brad, thank you so much for joining me, man. Really appreciate you taking the time. Let's talk in 6 weeks, all right?
Absolutely. Happy to do it as always.
Joined by Stephen Cameron of Orlando Magic HQ. Really excited to talk about the Orlando Magic. What a fun story for this season, man. This has been a lot of fun to monitor, a lot of fun to watch. One of the teams that plays with the most joy in the NBA right now. Is it as much fun on the ground?
Ryan, first off, thanks for having me. And yes, this season has been a blast so far. From watching it on television to covering the team to I even got to attend a game a couple weeks ago when I was visiting Orlando, and it's just the energy behind this team right now is just a blast, and it doesn't hurt that they're winning a lot of games at the moment. So yes, to answer your question, Ryan, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. I mean, more fun than we've had in a decade.
No, that's the thing is like, for any fan base, this is like for some fan bases, this is just like, hey, one of the stretches that they have every couple of years or so. Yeah. For the Orlando Magic, it has been so difficult to string together dominance, and that's just kind of not a word that's really in the ether ever since Dwight Howard kind of left. So it is super, super cool to be able to see this happen, and couldn't happen to a better fan base. 9 in a row before losing on a back-to-back in Brooklyn. Don't have to worry about that one. But the team is 14-6, 5th in net rating, 16th in offense, which is actually a surprisingly positive number given where the team has been at for a long time. But then 3rd in defensive rating per cleaning the glass. It's been like, which of those do you want to start with?
Oh man, I mean, you just have to kind of hit like defense. Like that is this team's calling card. They have Jalen Suggs, who at this rate should be considered for one of the all defensive teams. If the season stopped now, or if he continues this projection that he's having, he's easily an all defensive team player with where he's at this moment. Jonathan Isaac, man, I forget the numbers right off the top of my head, but I saw the on and off court numbers with him defensively, and it's like night and day how awesome he contributes to the team on the defensive end. Like still one of the best defenders in the league. I think the reason why he's not getting talked about at a higher level as far as league defensively is because simply he's playing 16 minutes a game right now, right? Not 25 to 32 where, you get the Bam Adebayos and some of the other, defensive guys that really get talked about on a regular basis. But this team, man, they're just so bought in on the defensive side. They play for Coach Mosley, who is a defensive minded coach. Balls on the ground, you got 2 or 3 guys diving on the floor for it. Jalen Suggs is he is anchoring a top 3 defense without 2 of our starters playing. Wendell Carter Jr. and Markelle Fultz are still out. Granted, they've been replaced by 2 guys that are also very good at defense, but let's be real. They're third unit players right now, and they're anchoring a top 3 defense with Jalen Suggs. And I think that just is a testament to like how much buy-in, because I think a lot of what is making this team so successful on that end, Ryan, is the effort. There's not a single play that no one is not giving 100% on the defensive side. And it's a blast. They terrorize teams, and it's so fun. They have so much size and switchability too, which is really cool.
It's awesome. We're a quarter of the way through the season, and we're talking about the Orlando Magic and what place in the playoffs they're going to have. I remember back before the season when we first had our talk, like we're wondering, hey, is the play-in, is that the right place for this team? Would that be the next step with their trajectory? You were a little bit more positive on that, at that time, just saying, hey, we don't know what this team's going to do. They could certainly develop a little bit faster than we thought they could. And I think Jalen Suggs is actually a great place to start there. A player that folks didn't know how to really evaluate him. They didn't know how to really process whether he could be that main guard next to a duo like Paolo and Franz. And I think that he has stepped into that role, maybe not as much on the offensive side, but has just really dominated on the defensive side to a level that there's a reason why they've been able to survive without Wendell Carter and Markelle Fultz. It's Jalen Suggs, it's Jonathan Isaac, it's everybody kind of stepping up. And I've just been really impressed with Jalen Suggs.
Yeah, I mean, he's been phenomenal. Obviously, I think a lot of the league didn't get to really have much of a cohesive thought around him because he's been injured, right? The last couple of seasons, he's played, just a couple of games. Rookie year, 48 games. Last year, 53 games. And a lot of times those are like interrupted with playing 2 games, a handful of games here, then out for 2 weeks, another couple of games there, out for another stretch of time. And now that he had a healthy off season, was able to keep his body and maintain his body ready for the NBA. And now he's staying healthy so far, a quarter of the way into the year. It's allowed him to just kind of find his rhythm as a defensive player. And also it doesn't hurt that he's hitting, 37% on his 3-point attempts right now. He's being a bit better with his selection offensively. And granted, it's still low attempts. I think it's 4 or 5 attempts per game. It's not high volume. I think probably closer to the 4 attempt per game there. But he's making 37% for them, and that's all you can ask for when it comes to someone standing next to Apollo and Franz. He admitted that he went back and watched a lot of film and did a lot of self-evaluation on his play his first 2 years, and kind of realized he had to make some serious changes in his games defensively, or mostly offensively, to be that dude. And it's paying off right now. He's making smarter passes. He's choosing when to score better. His outside shot is looking good. He's attacking the basket well and doing a lot of he doesn't do a lot of self-creation shots, but he's doing a lot of cleanup plays with, tap-ins and, making smart cuts and things like that. And his connectivity with the team as a playmaker is also improved. He's never going to be that Chris Paul, Markelle Fultz style, let's set up the offense. But,
Sure.
This team doesn't really play that way anyways right now, where anyone can set up the offense, right? You have Paulo, Franz, Suggs, Anthony Black, all 4 of those guys can initiate offense, which is really great in that starting unit.
And I'm just looking at the numbers here. It has gone even further past the starters because the bench has been so good. There's a lot of guys that you can point to on that bench unit, but Cole Anthony averaging 15 points and then nearly 4 assists off the bench has been super helpful. But I'm looking at Mo Wagner's numbers. 13 points in 19 minutes as the backup center is insane. I don't know how people they have not really fully appreciated that he's doing it in under 20 minutes a night, and his efficiency and his effectiveness has just been so good. What about that backup bench unit has really kind of stood out to you?
It's actually a name you haven't even said yet. And Cole and Mo are phenomenal players, but I think a lot of the reasons they are so successful is because of someone named Joe Ingles. He is one of those players that kind of just brings everyone together and allows everyone to play the right way. He has the ball in his hands a lot as an initiator and as a distributor within the second unit. If you look at the pick and roll numbers between him and Mo Wagner, it's insane the connectivity they have there on the amount of times they connect within a pick and roll compared to Mo and the rest of the team when Ingles is initiating a pick and roll. It just allows so much of. I think what I'm trying to say is also like Joe Ingles is also like distributing the ball, I think, twice as many times to Mo Wagner to the rest of the second unit too. So it's like Mo's success is very much tied to Joe Ingles' success. Sure. And then Cole Anthony's success on his efficiency is also very much tied to Joe Ingles' success, because Joe Ingles has a way to he'll hesitate before he makes a pass to make sure the pass is appropriately timed with a certain mismatch or a certain opening within a play. And it's always on point within a player's pocket. And so you also have him coaching that second unit the entire time. And it's my good friend Philip Rossman Wright with Locked On Magic and Orlando Magic Daily always says, if you want to fix a Magic lineup, stick Joe Ingles in there, because he just has a way of settling everything and making sure everything works smoothly and functionally. So shout out to Cole and Mo Wagner, who are scoring madmen right now. And Cole should be I think he's leading the league in points off the bench, and should be considered for sixth man of the year. But a lot of that success for that entire second unit is also led back to Joe Ingles.
Well, it's a unit, and that's one of the most important things about that group is that the starters, they've been fine. They haven't won their minutes a ton. It has been the bench a lot of times that has just pushed it over the top, and it's those I've read a stat. I'm not going to get it exactly right, but after the first 6 minutes of the game, after the 6 minutes at the beginning of the third quarter, the Magic are one of the most dominant teams when you can mix and match those other lineups with a Joe Ingles, with a Mo Wagner, with a Cole Anthony, in with Paolo and Franz. And the other factor, I think, in the most kind way possible, it's a team full of assholes. These guys, they get after it. They are very, very fun. They're feisty, and they also get under everybody's skin. Joe Ingles is the captain of that team for obvious reasons, but Cole Anthony's willing to mix it up, and Mo Wagner's willing to mix it up. These guys they coming off the bench and they just provide some attitude. They provide some feistiness, and I think that really gets under a lot of teams' skin.
Totally. I mean, you also have Jalen Suggs, who after he does a dunk or a good assist, he looks at the crowd and will stand there and pump them up with his arms going up, or highlight, with a big chest, the Magic on his uniform. And I mean, he's creating energy so much. He's the heart and soul of this team energy wise. But yeah, then you have Mo and Joe just, a little bit of chippering on the floor, and they play with edge. The Magic used to be, I was one of them. I complained, man, this team has no edge. It's Evan Fournier is the only one that had attitude on the floor, and played with that kind of edge and passion. And it's I don't have to say that complaint anymore. We got a team of dogs, and that play, whistle to whistle every single time. And to that testament, what you were mentioning about that stat, this was a week or two ago that I saw it, but it was they broke down which team wins each quarter, and the Magic own the second quarter. Which just, that's the quarter that our second unit's in. So it makes sense that they own the second quarter as far as, leading the league in it, which is really cool.
Haven't mentioned Paolo and Franz enough here. They certainly get enough credit. They are the two young stars for the team. They're one of the best young star duos in the league for sure. Just give me your scouting report so far on where those guys have improved the most and what you'd like to continue to see from them going forward.
Man, Paolo right now is they're both having to do more ball handling than we expected, with Markelle Fultz only playing 5 games so far, which is really good for their long-term development. Yeah. Comes with some turnovers here and there that they're still working through, but I'm really not too worried about that right now. This is awesome for long-term development, because ultimately you want the ball in their hands, right? Paolo, something that's been awesome for him is his 3-point shooting. He's gotten a lot more selective with when he decides to shoot the 3. And right now, Ryan, give me a guess, unless you've already looked it up. What do you think his 3-point shooting is at?
Unfortunately,
this
I'm
season?
Staring at it on my second screen right now, so I'll let the audience know.
44%, right?
Pretty good.
Granted, it's low volume, right? I think it's 3 to 4 attempts per game, but it's, he's making them, and that's what matters, right? That volume will increase eventually, and that will be great. It's also like the defensive assignment that he had with Team USA, like, don't suck on defense. You're here to play backup center, defend, and do his offensive role that he was assigned to. That is translating to this year too, right? He's not going to be like a top defender in this league, but he is not a weak link by any means on this Magic roster, which is really cool, and was a question mark on him coming into the league in a bit last year too.
Sure.
I don't think anyone's nitpicking his defense anymore, which is cool. Franz, he's kind of had a weird start to the season. His shooting numbers have been a little bit off, but like, he's still a two-way monster. He's distributing the ball very well. He's attacking the basket extremely efficiently like he normally does. And he had 3 30-point games in a row, during our homestand. So
which is a big deal. Like, we are still talking Orlando Magic basketball here. Like, it is a big deal for a guy like that to really stand out as a dominant scorer. And for what he has done in his third year, what Paolo is doing in his second year, like, it's just awesome to be able to see. Like, these guys they're going to be the future of the league.
Ryan, I'm gonna say a word. All-star. Both of them.
Okay.
They're not going to be starters. But if they keep at this consistency and stay a top 4 team in the East, how could the coaches not vote at least one of them in, if not both of them in?
It would be a travesty to not have one of them in, especially if the team does keep up this pace. Now, I do think that's a question. It's a fair question. That, like, when you see a team that you don't usually expect be at the top of the standings, you wonder, okay, when's the other shoe going to drop? When's the adjustment going to happen? What does Orlando have to do then to maintain this level?
They have to keep their defense. If they don't keep a top 3, top 5 defense, then this whole thing comes apart. Their offense isn't strong enough to maintain that. And a lot of the reason their offense is so good right now is because it's created off of their defense, forcing transitions and attacking the paint when defense isn't set with the opposite team. So their defense starts to collapse. It stops creating those offensive moments. So they have to stay tight on the defensive end. And we've seen it slip the last couple of games, right? Those 2 Wizards games and the Nets game, those teams were scoring up more than they should have. Granted, we got wins out of 2 of those 3 games, but the Magic have had 2 days off right now before they play the Cavs tonight. This is Wednesday, December 6th. We're recording this, so
right.
I'm not sure when the listeners will hear this, but we're playing the Cavs tonight. We're hoping that these 2 practice days the Magic had will help tighten up that defense, and they got to be able to keep it locked in for the rest of the year. Granted, we're going to have Wendell Carter Jr. coming back. That will help. Jonathan Isaac's only going to continue to grow this season as long as no major injuries happen. His minutes will continue to increase. As long as Jalen Suggs stay healthy, but this team has to stay committed to the defensive end because we don't have the shooting to be an offensive threat without the defense being there.
Shout out to Goga Batadze, who we haven't mentioned, for filling a role. He's been really good.
He's killing it.
Really, really good, especially on the defensive end. Shout out to Anthony Black for stepping up as a starter. Even if it hasn't been perfect, he has filled a role to what they've needed. And then, like, everybody can take a bow for Orlando so far. It has been an awesome season to begin here, and I'm looking forward to seeing where they go. But he is Stephen Cameron of Orlando Magic HQ. Make sure to give him a follow over on all those platforms. I'll make sure to link them down in the description. Stephen, thank you so much for chatting, man. Really appreciate you.
Ryan, thanks for having me. Until next time, let's go Magic.
All right, joined now by Wes Golberg. He's a host of Locked On Heat as well as for the Locked On NBA Podcast Network. Wes, thank you so much for taking the time, man. Let's talk about Miami. This has been an interesting time for Miami. Just you lose Tyler Herro relatively early on in the year, but the Heat just keep on trucking. There's a lot to kind of get into with the crevices of this team, but what do you think is the biggest kind of maybe macro difference between last year and this year so far?
I actually think this team is deeper than the team that made the finals last year. This is a team that now has real options for the starting lineup. Remember last year, they were starting Caleb Martin as an undersized power forward for most of the season. This year, they have Haywood Highsmith as a power forward. He's a little bit longer, a little bit more of a power forward body there. Makes a little bit more sense at that position. Caleb Martin, who was injured for the start of the season, now healthy, playing really well off the bench, which is the role that Spo wants to use him in. You add that to guys like Kevin Love being here for the entire season, not just after the buyout market. You've got a rookie like Jaime Jaquez Jr. making an impact early on, and I'm sure we'll talk about him later in the show. And then you combine that with, sort of a bounce back season for Duncan Robinson, better play at the backup center spot, whether it's Orlando Robinson or somebody else. Kevin Love has been used as that backup center quite a bit recently. I think this team is the addition of Josh Richardson. I think this team is just deeper than the one last year. Last year's team was not very good. Last year's team had to go into the play-in tournament in order to make the playoffs. And so I think this team is starting to trend in a direction where hopefully that's not going to be the case, that they can get one of those top 6 seeds in the Eastern Conference. Whether or not this team makes a finals run, who knows? That kind of depends on a whole other bunch of factors. But I do think that this team is just flatly deeper than the one last year.
It's interesting to think about it that way, because when you lose a couple guys in the offseason, and Gabe Vincent and Max Strus, guys who were important to the team last year, and I think a lot of people, myself included, thought, okay, this is probably going to hurt them, especially during the regular season where you just need to build in rotation minutes for guys that you trust. But it just seems like they keep getting away with it, man. We got to talk about Jaime Jaquez Jr. That is one of the biggest stories of, I think, maybe the NBA season so far. Tell me about Jaime Jaquez Jr. Tell the world about Jaime Jaquez and what he has brought as a rookie to the Heat.
Well, it's funny because in training camp, you talk to players and coaches, and they would throw around a cliche that you and I have heard a lot, kind of talking with people. It's, oh, he's a veteran, he's not really a rookie, he's a veteran. And you're like, okay, you just sort of as a reporter kind of roll your eyes. You're like, all right, I've heard that before. But then you see him play and you're like, oh, wait, no, I get it. Like how this guy plays is so under control. It is so measured. It is so tactful. Like, he knows exactly who he is as a rookie. I feel like a lot of players, it takes them years to kind of find their voice in the NBA. And for Jaime, he's just walked in and he's like, these are the things that I do really well. I could play in the post. I eat up space in the paint. I'm gonna take those catch and shoot threes when they're available. I'm gonna rebound. I'm gonna get guys involved. I'm gonna play make. I'm gonna screen for teammates. Like, he does all those hustle things, but he can also score. He can also pass. The Heat, within the first week of the season, started running sets for him. Like, it'd be one thing, like, if it was for another young team, right? Like, a young team has to get the ball to somebody, but this is a veteran team. This is a team with Jimmy, Bam Adebayo, Kyle Lowry. Like, there's a lot of established guys who have made runs to the finals and Eastern Conference Finals over the last 4 years. And for them to rely on a guy like Jaime, I just think is astounding. I think it's nothing short of shocking. And every time they have given him something more to do, he's taken it, he's run with it, he's aced that pop quiz, and then he's gotten ready for the next one. It's pretty remarkable what they found at the 18th pick.
It really is interesting to think about. Like, he is like one of the guys that I think that every playoff team would want as a rookie. Denver had a guy like that last year in Christian Brown, who was immediately able to step into a little bit of a role. But Jaime's even a little bit better than that. Just the way that he's able to assume more responsibility on the team and be like, everybody is very comfortable when he has the ball in his hands. And that's just so rare for a young player on a really good team. It's awesome to see, and he will continue to grow into that role. And I wonder if he's going to maybe upset the pecking order in some ways down the line. That'll be interesting to track. The defense, so just looking at the net ratings and some of the ratings on Cleaning the Glass, 20th in net rating, a little bit of a weird one because there's like 20 different teams that have a positive point differential right now. So every team is pretty good. 13th in offense, 18th in defense. Defense kind of falling off a little bit, although it wasn't like anything too special last year. Just into some of the weeds on this. Bottom 5 in rim field goal percentage allowed and bottom 5 in 3-point percentage allowed. What do you think's gone into that? Just kind of on boots on the ground there.
Well, number one, they just played 2 games against the Indiana Pacers, who are breaking records for offense. And so prior to that 2-game little mini series against Indiana, the Heat actually ranked, I believe it was 12th or 13th in defensive rating, if I have it right. So now, after 2 games against the Pacers, they drop quite a bit. That said, when you mentioned kind of going under the hood on some of those stats, those have been troublesome issues for them for most of the season. Specifically at the rim, I could attribute that to Bam Adebayo missing games. He's missed now 5 games because of a hip injury. When he's not in there, they just don't look the same offensively. Jimmy Butler, for the first 4 or 5 games of the season, just wasn't himself on either end of the court. And I know it feels like we've kind of watched a lot of basketball here, but in terms of sample size, we're still dealing with a very small sample, right? And that's evidenced by the fact that you can play 2 games against the Pacers and it just completely throws off your defensive rating. Offensive rating, they're like 11th right now. They're not the 11th best offense in the NBA. You and I both know that. But because they played the Pacers twice in a row, and the Pacers not only are an elite offense themselves, but they make every team look like an elite offense, it throws off their rating. But defensively, I think they're going to be okay. I think they'll be fine. When they're healthy, they have Bam Adebayo, Haywood Highsmith, who might be their 3rd best defender already on the team, Jimmy Butler. When those 3 guys are healthy and going, and in that starting lineup, I don't know that there's any team in the league that looks at Miami's defense and says, yeah, that's going to be easy to score on.
Yeah, I think it's completely fair. I don't see any reason why because the defensive personnel is still really, really good, especially when the starting unit is intact and everybody's kind of in their place and Caleb Martin's then rotating in. I was curious, you mentioned the backup center spot earlier and just how that has improved. I was under the impression that based kind of Thomas Bryant's not really in the rotation anymore, might be kind of mixing and matching different bodies, maybe not necessarily settling on one. That to me seems like a spot that could be concerning, but not really because Bam Adebayo is going to play a bunch of minutes at center in the playoffs. Like, how concerning is that actually?
I'm really not concerned. They've basically settled in now with Kevin Love playing the backup 5. Kevin Love started the season at power forward as a starting power forward. The Heat eventually moved him out, moved Haywood Highsmith into that starting spot, and then that allowed Kevin Love to come in at the bench as that backup center, which is probably what he is at this point in his career. And it actually works nicely because Spoelstra is able to stagger Bam and Jimmy Butler and their minutes, and then he kind of staples Kevin Love's minutes to Jimmy Butler's, and that, of course, makes a lot of sense just intrinsically. Like, okay, pick and pop center with Jimmy Butler, space the floor for him. That makes sense. So I think that's a good addition, a good a spot for Kevin Love to fill. And then recently we've seen Orlando Robinson fill in that starting lineup for Bam Adebayo as Bam's missed games. So he's played well. He had his first career double-double the other night in Toronto. He's a good rebounder. He's a drop defense defender, kind of rim protector, big body. Doesn't do anything flashy. But Thomas Bryant, as that backup center earlier in the season, was a problem, right? Like, he's a guy who, Denver fans know this. He's a little slow-footed, not a guy that you can exactly play in crunch time, not really super reliable defensively. And then if he's not giving you that offensive spark, he's not really bringing much of anything. He's a net negative at the end of the day. Orlando Robinson's just a little bit more steady defensively. So I think it was a little rough to start the year as that backup center spot, as they kind of sorted through their options and toggled through some different lineups. But now that it feels like they've settled on what it's going to be, I actually think it's going to be a strength of theirs because Orlando Robinson's basically their third center, not a guy that has to play every night. But if you do have to call his number, he's shown that he could be a spot rotation guy here and there.
And then with the rest of the rotation, obviously, this is a mix and match kind of team where you've got a lot of guys that are capable of filling a lot of different roles. Kyle Lowry's still going very strong, and that 3-point percentage is pretty crazy just looking at it here. But like we talked about, Jaime Jaquez is going to give you good minutes. Josh Richardson's going to give you good minutes. There's a lot of guys that I think, as you mentioned, the depth is just way better here, and it allows you to survive an absence from a guy like Tyler Herro. Just can you give us the latest on where Tyler Herro is at in his recovery?
He's out of the walking boot. He's been practicing in non-contact situations. He's been putting up shots at the end of practices when the media is allowed in. You could see his ankle, no bandages, no wraps. Okay, so that's all good signs. Still no timetable for his return. Probably expecting it at some point this month, though.
Yeah, it's good to hear. He is obviously a very, very helpful player and started off the season extremely well, and somebody that I know was at the center of a lot of things when it comes to this offseason and a lot of the discussions that we had about a certain point guard in Milwaukee now. So is there, like, given the way that the season has gone, is there any FOMO in that side of things, or have Miami Heat fans just kind of moved on?
Miami Heat fans aren't exactly known for moving on, but I don't know that if there's a FOMO, it's that the Heat have been one of the worst fourth quarter teams in the NBA this year. Part of that is because one of their best fourth quarter scorers, Tyler Herro, hasn't been involved for most of the season because of that ankle injury. But the other part of that too is that Damian Lillard has been one of the best clutch scorers in the NBA this season. So you kind of been like, all right, well, we're one of the worst fourth quarter teams. We've got maybe the option for us this summer was one of the best fourth quarter scorers. It would have been nice to have that guy here. I don't know, based on what Milwaukee has done so far, that Heat fans are feeling anyway, or the Heat themselves are feeling like that team is much better than us, despite having gotten the guy that we wanted this summer. Now the Bucks are trending in the right direction. Maybe that's something that changes. Maybe that's a sentiment that changes a little bit in the next couple of months. But for now, I don't think that the Heat are afraid of the Bucks. I don't think they're afraid of, honestly, anybody right now in the Eastern Conference. It's not saying that they shouldn't be. I just don't think that they necessarily are, personally. But that's not to say that there aren't questions about what it looks like when Tyler Herro comes back on this thing, because they got on a little bit of a roll there with Tyler Herro out. Duncan Robinson's played really well in his place. I do wonder if it's something that they explore about whether or not they want to bring Tyler Herro off the bench and leave Duncan Robinson in that starting lineup. I think that that's got to be on the table, based on the way that Duncan's played. So if that's the case, what happens with Tyler Herro? He'll come off the bench. He can sort of reprise that sixth man of the year role that he had a couple of years ago. I think that would be helpful. But the question would be, obviously, does Tyler Herro buy into that kind of role? Because he's somebody that wants to start. He wants to make a play for the All-Star team. That's kind of his personal goals. If he's not okay with that, what does that do to that locker room? I think there's a lot of questions in regards to Tyler Herro. The one question I don't have is he was putting up career highs before the injury. He looked really good. He's developed as a scorer. He's really developed as a playmaker. I thought he got better defensively. He was averaging a career high in steals. I think that was really big for Miami, and it kind of fits their formula in terms of what they want to do defensively. He's a really good player. I don't think that there's any doubt about that.
Yeah, and I wonder if there is some doubt on the Portland side of things, just how things have gone for Miami so far this year. It's always, we'll just ignore that little detail, because I'm sure a lot of people are, especially Portland fans, are probably tired of hearing it after the way that the trade has gone for them so far. So we will see what happens, but I'm very curious as to how this evolves for Miami. But I'm looking forward to tracking it all with you, Wes. So here's Wes Golberg over at Locked On Heat and Locked On NBA. Make sure to follow all of his work over there. Thank you so much, Wes. Let's check in 6 weeks, all right?
Thanks, man.
All right, joined now by Walker Mehl, who is the host of Locked On Hornets, as well as a radio host for WFNZ and Charlotte local radio. Walker, thank you so much for joining me, man. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me on once again.
Let's talk Hornets. Let's talk about a team that there have been some positive moments. There have been some positive outcomes, but overall it's been definitely more of a negative start to the season. Should we start with the LaMelo Ball injury? I think that's probably the place where we have to go. It's horrible timing, to say the least. I want you to explain to the audience why it's such horrible timing given how he was playing.
Well, yeah. So if you go back to the beginning of the season, LaMelo was not shooting the ball well at all. It was pretty bad. So he was giving you a lot of, he would go even 0 for very deep into these games when you're first starting the regular season. And so we were all wondering, when is LaMelo Ball going to be able to be LaMelo again? Steve Clifford kept saying it's going to take a while for him to get back to his rhythm after a million ankle injuries last year, including the one that did him in, fracturing that right ankle. And it was all about when he's going to find his rhythm. Well, did he ever? Really, in that fourth quarter against Dallas? And so they were in that game. He goes nuclear there. starts hitting a ton of three-point shots. Also had the lockup D on Tyrese Halliburton, which was nice to see. It's hard to do it to that guy, as we all saw in the in-season tournament. So had a great defensive possession there, fourth quarter against Dallas. And after that, there was probably, 10, even more games than that, where he didn't score anything less than 25 points. He was consistently shooting even 50% from three in those games. I think the lowest three-point percentage he put up was maybe 35. It was ridiculous. Bona fide all-star, not somebody's going to get injured, and then that's how LaMelo gets in. Offensively, LaMelo was playing so well. He had gone to an extra level. He was getting to the rim. He was shooting more free throws. Those were a couple things that most Hornets fans, lots of Melo fans wanted to see, and he had increased his points per game average to 25, and then he gets hurt in that Orlando Magic game, and over the last week and a half, it hurts. Even if offensively the Hornets are still scoring points, you're not going to win too many basketball games when somebody you committed $200 million to isn't out there. So it's really hurtful. It sucks for this team. It sucks for LaMelo, who is now, I think, suffering his fifth separate ankle injury. Had a bunch of sprains to his left ankle, fractured his right last year, sprained it again. MRI said it was a sprain that they would they would recheck him out in a week or so. And so I think that timetable is about to come up, but I don't expect him back anytime soon. Yeah, you're right, Ryan. He was playing so well, and for him to get hurt right at that time, it hurts him, it hurts the team, and it's unfortunate all the way around.
It's horrible because obviously you give the slow start that he had a little bit of breathing room because he was off for as much time as he was last year. So you let him get up to speed, and he starts to get up to speed, and then he gets hurt. It's painful because he was playing at an extremely high level. He's a fun player for so many people to watch. And now you just wonder where Charlotte's going to go from here, because if this is kind of a prolonged absence, I wonder if the team can handle that, because they've centered a lot of stuff around him for obvious reasons. He is the center of their playmaking. He is somebody who, he gets criticized for various things that he does on the court, but more than anything, he still creates good shots for everybody. So I'm worried about it, man. I'm worried about that on the offensive end, but I'm also just worried about the defense, because defensively, we're looking at the numbers here, 6-12 record, 27th best point differential on cleaning the glass, 19th in offensive rating was fine. I'm sure that's come down a little bit since LaMelo got hurt, but 28th in defensive rating is, you just can't survive that these days.
No, you can't. So we can go to cleaning the glass, which, we can go to the advanced stats. We can go to the defensive rating, which is, I think, 28th just in, NBA.com, whatever, too. It's all bad. But even if we just want to go straight up surface level stats, we don't even have to dig deeper. What we can do is we can see how many points per game the opposition is scoring, and it's consistently 115 or above. That's the mark. If you hold a team to 115, then honestly, it's about as good as you could ask for from this Hornets squad. They did a good job against Boston. I think Boston scored 118. That was over a week ago, maybe a couple weeks ago. That went to overtime, so the numbers might be misleading on the surface. But Ryan, if they don't score 120 points, then the Hornets don't have a chance to win, at least with the level of defense they're playing right now. That is a crazy burden for this squad to go out there with every single time. If we get to 120, then we have a shot. Even against Brooklyn, the one win that they've had since LaMelo got injured, they scored 129. They give up 128, and Cam Johnson has a very good look at the three-point line to possibly get that victory for the Nets, and it just doesn't fall. And so the Hornets, come out on top. But defensively, it's been so bad. Steve Clifford went on a rant after this Minnesota Timberwolves loss and says that this team doesn't play with any physicality. It's not that there's a lack of effort. It's not that they don't play with purpose. I think they get out and transition. They play with an effort. They play with a joy for the game. But it's the physicality, the defensive rebounds they give up. Mark Williams, up and down season for him. And just when, Nick Richards was concussed for a while, so he just came back from protocol. PJ Washington, not the greatest defensive rebounder, will give you some strength down low, but he's out on the perimeter a lot. And so, you're talking about if he's not down in the paint, then you're not talking about him grabbing, a ton of offensive rebounds, and defensively, he has a bunch of different assignments. And so They just haven't been good there. Miles Bridges has helped, but Steve Clifford blames it on the lack of physicality and just not getting back in transition. And so it's like he keeps saying it's something we can fix tomorrow. It's not that we have to go through these installs that take a couple of weeks and it'll take a while for the team to gel. It could be fixed tomorrow. And that's why Steve Clifford, if he had any hair, he'd be pulling it out. Like he's angry. He's fed up. I'm sorry, Steve, but he's fed up right now. And he continues to tell you didn't even take questions this last time out. And so that's how bad the Hornets have been on that end of the floor.
It's got to be frustrating. I know that's one of the things that they brought him in to do was to stabilize the defense a little bit, to get these guys playing in the right way.
And did so last year. And did so last year in the second half of last season with no LaMelo, with so many injuries. They were towards the top in defensive rating. And it was probably, I think they just got back in transition. What happened was they had so many younger players out there. It felt like they just bought in a lot more. Mark Williams was playing pretty well, and he was actually in and out with injuries. And so that's what's maddening, too, is that they were actually playing better in the second half last season on defense. And now it's, among the worst. It might be the worst in all of the NBA.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's basically 28th, but they're in the Washington and Indiana and San Antonio division, basically. So
that's right.
We'll classify those teams in a little bit of a different category.
The non-Washington group, I like that group. Yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah, let's pivot then. Let's focus on Miles Bridges because he was a big storyline heading into the year, and somebody who obviously a lot of people had a lot of questions for, a lot of people had a lot of thoughts about. I want to focus more on the fans. How have the fans received the return of Miles Bridges to the squad?
They've received him well. And so, make of that whatever you want. They received him well when they announced his name coming back. I think from a PR standpoint, the Charlotte Hornets, they didn't start him his first game back, but they did bring him off of the bench. It would have been a little bit later in the first quarter. And so Big Pat, a legendary PA announcer at the Spectrum Center, they didn't get the huge fanfare with the graphics on the Jumbotron and then Big Pat announcing his name. They didn't give him that, which seemed calculated and also smart. But they did announce his name once he entered the contest, and he received more cheers than boos for sure. And I don't know if I'm advocating for boos more so than just maybe not the standing ovation that it almost got to. So you're asking how they received him? Yeah, I think if the Spectrum Center speaks for the entire fan base, they received him pretty well. He's been playing well, Ryan. I mean, I think offensively, you see him attacking in space, getting downhill. I thought there might be some rust because it's hard to not play for, 92 games of what he missed with the Charlotte Hornets and then come back in and then pick up right where he left off, 2 years ago now. And maybe that still comes when there might be a wall that he hits for not being in the NBA conditioning. I don't know, right? But right now, he's shooting pretty well from the field. His three-point shot, he's shooting better than he did 2 years ago from three-point land. So he's shooting 50, 44, and 83 on 20 points per game. The rebounding's actually a little bit down in these last few games, but he did have 3 straight games where he had double-digit boards, and this is something that this team has needed a lot of help with. So, yeah, I think the fans, they wanted somebody to come in and help them play basketball. Didn't matter what happened off of the court, and, it's frustrating, but that's what the fans wanted. And Miles, yes, just watching him play, absolutely helping this team as much as he possibly can with his skill level, and he's been playing well since he came back.
Yeah, obviously, I know people are going to feel some kind of way about it. They're going to feel pretty conflicted about it, and everybody has a right to feel conflicted about it. But still wanted to make mention of it because he has played well on the court, and he's been somebody who has clearly helped them, despite the fact that the overall trajectory of the team hasn't been spectacular over the course of these past few. Last thing for me, Brandon Miller, kind of gone under the radar with a lot of the stuff that's gone on with the Hornets here. I want you to give me the Brandon Miller scouting report. What has impressed you? What has concerned you so far?
The shot making has impressed me the most. And I thought, so Brandon Miller, his first year in the league, I thought he was going to contribute a lot off ball, where if he just knocked down shots, then that's all I want from him. second overall pick, of course, you want to become that superstar where he's the big wing archetype, most valuable archetype in a lot of people's minds, where he can put the ball on the deck and be a 3-level scorer. That's what you're hoping for him as his career goes on. What he's doing is he's knocking down his 3-point shot for the most part. He's shooting 38% from 3-point land right now, 46 overall from the field. He's not getting to the rim a lot. He's very good in transition, and so any of those rim shots, that's happening in the open floor. And he's very good at running the court. He's a good passer. He was very good at Alabama. That still shows up more so when he's going to make the right play mold. And that's something that we saw in Summer League. They didn't have a good point guard in Summer League, and so I think that really affected his scoring total, his percentages. But playing with better basketball players, it's actually helped him a lot more to where he's playing better in the NBA rather than Summer League. And I think the fan base here, we've had our fair share of consecutive Summer Leagues without a real point guard, and so we're actually like weirdly intelligent to that at this point. Like, we're privy to not having a point guard, and it'll be fine once he gets to the regular season. But he makes the right pass. He doesn't make offensive decisions like a rookie. I think defensively there's still some rookie stuff. I think he gets bullied a lot if you get within 15 feet of the rim. Just skinny, and I doesn't have the brute strength that some of these other NBA players have. I think some of his drives, they hang out in the middle of the floor. So what happens is he can't get by his guy as much, and he'll shoot those mid-range jumpers. But those mid-range jumpers are working. And so I've often compared it to these dual-threat quarterbacks where if a quarterback goes in and he's running a lot, of course you don't want him to run it all the time. But that buys him time to learn the other skills, the other nuances of what it is to be a QB in the NFL. I feel like the driving, stopping, maybe not getting to the rim, but popping those mid-range jumpers, I feel like that almost allows him to stay on the floor even if he's not getting to the basket. And that allows him to pick and choose his spots because that's not necessarily his strength right now. So with Brandon, he's been very good. And I do think you're right. Gone under the radar with Chet doing what he's doing. Yeah, he's not leader in Rookie of the Year award, but he's been really good here with Charlotte, no doubt about it.
Well, good to see it, especially after all of the draft hoopla. There was definitely a lot of that and a lot of questions around the league.
And I raised my hand high. I mean, I was hardcore Team Scoot. I definitely was hardcore Team Scoot, and Scoot clearly doesn't look very good with Portland. And Brandon Miller, it's always going to be about what kind of superstar he can become. But I just think the shot making, continuing to make the right play, using his length on defense, there's a lot to really like. And he's up for the big moments too. He doesn't shy away from any trash talking. He's here for all the smoke. And so you can see this guy wants it, and he's not going to back down from anybody, which is also a great sign for him to continue to grow and grow in the NBA.
Well, here is to LaMelo getting back sooner rather than later, so he can continue getting those nice assists, setting up a guy like Brandon Miller. We will see what happens with Charlotte. But he is Walker Mehl, host of Locked On Hornets and a radio host over at WFNZ. Walker, thank you so much for taking the time, man. Let's talk in 6 weeks, all right?
Absolutely. Thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it.
All right, joined now by Neil Dalal, covering the Washington Wizards for Hoop District and Sports Rabbi. Really appreciate you taking the time, Neil. Let's talk about the Wizards. Let's talk about a team that has unfortunately not manifested in as much of the fun, as much of the exciting basketball as we might have hoped at the beginning of the year. It's probably got to start with the defense, right? Like, you don't go 3-17 without having. It really has been one of the worst defenses in the NBA.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a problem that has, troubled them for the last couple of seasons. Everybody thought that, Wes Unseld Jr. coming in could kind of right that ship. They really haven't had that good of a defense, the past 8+ years, going back to Randy Whitman. It's not been great. It's not been pretty. There are times when they're giving up 130, 140, 150 points. Kyle Kuzma put it eloquently one night that they can't even guard a stop sign sometimes. That certainly, some of that is due to their starting backcourt is not going to be a defensive prowess or strength when you have limited size there. So certainly defense has been an issue. And then the nights where, they're not necessarily hitting their shots, they've had a handful of those games just get pretty ugly pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's got to be frustrating. I know that for Wizards fans, a fan base that has kind of, and this is part of the process, right? I think we knew that this year would be probably a step back and that it was going to be maybe worse before it got better. But even still, like just the losing streak that the team has gone on, I know it's been interrupted like here or there by a win, but it's got to be frustrating. Let's start with Jordan Poole then. He was one of the main characters for Washington over the course of this offseason and trading for him and acquiring him. Have Wizards fans enjoyed the Jordan Poole experience so far?
Yeah, it's, pretty polarizing topic point. Obviously, a lot of people, when he first arrived, was like, hey, we got a player who may not be that much of a step back of a Bradley Beal on a, relatively much better contract. I think even though he might not necessarily admit it as much, being the focus of scouting reports night in and night out, getting double teams, getting box and ones, getting, the kitchen sink thrown at you defensively, it's going to be an adjustment for a guy who was playing alongside Hall of Famers in Golden State. And so these first 20 games, especially I would say that those first 12 to 15 games, it was a rough stretch for a while. He's hopefully maybe turning a corner with his efficiency. Still has, probably a bit too many turnovers at times, but, the hope is that, okay, these next 20 games, is going to be another step in the right direction, another, means of comfortability, not just on the court, but, everything off the court, just getting familiar with the team, familiar with the city. So certainly there's, a large portion of Wizards fans who have been frustrated by, the lack of defense or this, looking, rightfully so, it looks nonchalant at times. And that's rightfully so irking many people, but I think hopefully as, he continues to get himself situated with this team and gets back to some of that, razzle-dazzle highlights that, he was known for, hopefully he can start to, ingratiate himself back with, the majority of fans again.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does to me feel like the rest of the offense, at least with Washington, has been pretty solid. They're running at a pretty high pace, second in pace so far, fourth in assists per game. And there's some good numbers, I think, to be had throughout the rest of the rotation. It's just with Jordan Poole, he's going to soak up a lot of those minutes, a lot of those scoring opportunities, and everybody's got to be aligned if you're going to be an offense team. So got to get him back on track. But has it at least been fun to watch with the rest of the offense as the team? I know that it's been a track meet in a lot of these games, and the defense is hard to watch sometimes, but there have been some positive signs offensively, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, they are getting up and down the court, very quickly. One of their metrics that they look at is, when they get the ball over half court with, 20 or more seconds on the shot clock. Will Dawkins, the GM, says, their offensive efficiency is, through the roof compared to, when they're slower in that regard. It has been fun. Last night, Wednesday night, Joel Embiid dropped 50 on them, which is crazy, but at the same time, they were right up and in it until the last couple minutes. A couple things didn't go their way. Free throw discrepancy was crazy, 34-8. But there have been a handful of games now, especially at home, where, things are somewhat exciting. And, that's what hopefully they can put forth for the fan base, here the rest of the season. A night like yesterday against Philadelphia, even, against Milwaukee, they've given them a couple good tests here and there. So hopefully that's a sign of, things to come. Still not going to, rack up the wins. They're going to fall probably pretty heavily short of their initial season win total projection of 24. But hopefully, these remainder 62 games can be a lot more of, these more recent close losses against, pretty good contending teams and not so much the blowouts that, they started to have earlier in the season.
It wouldn't surprise me if, because the defense has gotten to the place where it has been, where everybody kind of takes a look in the mirror after this first quarter of the season and things get a little bit better. I know that everybody wants to try to play in the same direction. You don't want guys going in different directions in the locker room, working for their own agendas, anything like that. And this team, there are enough veterans that I think you can look at it and say, yeah, there are players that are still playing for something in this league. And whether it's for like auditioning for a different team or if it's just making sure to make the best of a situation, there's like I can see this team upping the pace on the wins a little bit, especially in the latter half of the year. Um, Kyle Kuzma is a guy that I'm pretty fascinated by. He has taken on additional responsibility. He's averaging more assists. He's averaging more points. What kind of steps has he taken forward? Is there leadership? Is it just the playmaking? What are you thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, looking back, to that Russell Westbrook trade that, sent Russ to LA, almost 3 years ago now, Kyle Kuzma has, absolutely been a, gem to have acquired for the Wizards. He's gotten better, pretty much every year that he's been in DC. He, like you said, still early in the season, but he's averaging, 23, 6, and 5 in only, 32 minutes a game. He's playing efficiently. He's playing as somebody and using his 6'10" body, appropriately, finishing around the rim. Certainly, he has learned a lot from the likes of a LeBron James in LA and trying to come and implement, a lot of that here in DC. He, is very much trying to be like, hey, I'm trying to make 1 through 15, 1 through 18, if you include the two-way players, better, each and every day. He certainly wants to win, but understands the situation that they're in right now and says, hey, I can still, when he's on the bench and, other guys are in the game, he's still very in tune with the game, very much cheering on his teammates. That's something not everybody will do, but, he's put it perfectly. I think he said, they're cheering for me. Who am I to not cheer for them when, they're in the game? So certainly it's been a joy to watch his continued development on and off the court. And still just, 28 years old. He's about at his prime, but, still could have another, step or two to really go. And, on a bad team like the Wizards, he's not going to make an all-star team this year, but, stats-wise, he's kind of in that conversation, as a fringe guy.
No, I totally agree with that. And the added pace is probably going to help in some of those actual numbers, but he has still really taken some steps. And I like to see that, where if you look in what on the outside looks like a bad situation in Washington, at least you can find these pockets of fun. At least you can find these pockets of, hey, these guys are playing well. Maybe the cohesive product isn't there, but there are elements that can be taken forward and can be moved forward. One of those is Bilal Coulibaly. I've been pretty impressed with him, and I want to hear your scouting report on the Frenchman.
Yeah, obviously rose up, the draft ranks this past year. Truly another joy to be around. He's just a very polished, mature, kind young man for just being 19, turned 19 just a few months ago. Speaks obviously to the way he was raised. He's very much grown up in the French league as well, learned a lot of good, useful things. He shared yesterday where one of the vets that he had there kind of taught him that, yeah, man, you can't dwell on the past. You gotta have a next play mentality at all times. You can't let one or two things linger, for the rest of your game. And he said, 2 years ago, that would impact my game quite a bit. Now I've kind of, obviously at times you're still going to be human, but for the most part, he makes a great play, same guy. Makes a terrible play, same guy. Knows that, okay, something goes wrong offensively, turnover, whatever it is, hey, can't compound that mistake. Got to get back on defense. His game overall is, really intriguing to see. He's a guy that, Will Dawkins said, his prime might not be for another 5, 6, 7 years, just traditionally based on age for, this kind of upper 20s kind of guys. But his defense is already, pretty darn good. He's already taking on the defensive matchups of, the best or second best or third best kind of players in the league on any given team, any given night. He spent time yesterday guarding Tyrese Maxey at times, guarding Joel Embiid, where, he picked his pocket in the backcourt and, had himself an easy dunk. Offensively, it's going to take some time. I think he's probably surprised himself a little bit with how good of a, mainly corner three-point shooter he has been so far. I think he's understanding that, hey, I have long strides. Whenever there's a lane to the basket, I might as well go and be aggressive and be in attack mode. it's truly been, fun to watch. Just these 20 games, you can see the progress that he's made. And he has that mentality of, hey, I'm going to get better every single day. And you stack that up over, a sequence of days, and you can see the improvement. Just in these first 20 games, in the next 20 games, you'll see more improvement. Then in the second half of the season, the last 40 games of the season, you'll see another step. He's hungry, he's working. Really seems like the Wizards have, gotten a slam dunk of a draft pick in the first round for the first time in, arguably a decade. They got, Bradley Beal, I want to say in the 2013 or 14 draft, and, John Wall a couple years before that. But this guy is certainly the limit for Bilal.
No, I love it. I think that you mentioned long-term view and thinking about the future and thinking about, and not just now, but 5-6 years down the road. He's a guy, obviously, that you have to think about that more so than anybody in maybe the NBA, because Washington, they're probably not going to be in position to compete over the course of the next couple of years. And so with him, he's got to have a short-term memory in a lot of these cases, because there are going to be some losses and he's probably going to get frustrated. But as he continues to progress, maybe he can help the turnaround in that entire process. So should be interesting to track. Last thing I have for you, give me some positives, or maybe one thing that you would like to see over the course of this next 6 weeks that we don't talk. One thing that you want to see that would encourage you during this stretch.
Yeah, obviously I think, it all comes back to Jordan Poole, whether he is a guy that is going to be here, 2 years from now or, 1 or 5 years from now. In the NBA, it's all a business. It's all about, the stock of your players and the assets you have in front of you. They are going to try and rebuild, his value. If he can, turn into a more efficient scoring player, the defense is probably not really going to ever be there. But if you can be more efficient like he was yesterday, I think 23 points on 10 of 15 shooting, instead of those, 25 shot attempt games and he's not even cracking 20 points, that's going to go a long way, because at the end of the day, there's always going to need to be a guy who can score the ball, in critical situations in the NBA. And that's going to be attractive to a lot of contending teams, 1 year, 2 years down the line. For the Wizards in general, to try and help accelerate this rebuild, they didn't get a whole lot of draft assets for Bradley Beal or Kristaps Porzingis. So whether Poole is here long term or is potentially going to get flipped, I wouldn't say it's this year at all. I know that was a wild misquote of Mark Stein that went crazy on Twitter, but it won't be this year. But if you can build his stock back up, and by the end of the season, maybe in the offseason you entertain something, more probably another year into his contract to try and get it a little bit more team-friendly in that regard. But hopefully he can demonstrate not only to himself, because he is putting in the work, and that's one thing he says all the time, can't worry about outside noise. I got to worry about the people around me and the people that know, what I'm putting into things. And certainly, everybody who's around him says, yes, great hard worker, wants to improve, doesn't want to be, in this rut that he was to start the season. So I'll be certainly excited to see these next 20 games, how he can improve. And then certainly by the second half of the season, it'll be interesting to see just how much this roster is different, because there are certainly a lot of veterans on expiring deals that likely, get moved out to, free up more playing time for the younger guys on this team.
Well, we will see what happens. He is Neil Dalal of Hoop District, covering the Washington Wizards for Hoop District and Sports Rabbi. Neil, thank you so much for taking the time with me, man. Want to talk in 6 weeks?
Absolutely.